Crimes committed against children have a special impact on society. They're creating a gap that can't be filled with anything. Along with the painful parents, neighbors, and strangers, silent observers suffer. No words can convey any comfort. This, albeit to a minimal extent, is only able to ensure justice, arrest, and prosecution of the perpetrator, and to do so as strictly as possible. The condition is one. Both the court and the families of the victims must be 100% sure that the right person is sitting on the defendant's bench. When even a shadow of doubt appears, peace in the heart of a desperate mother or father may never come. It was felt on their own by parents from Atlanta who lost their beloved children. It was a sunny summer in 1979. Atlanta still remembered the flaming speeches of Martin Luther King and tried to build a reputation as an open, friendly, and tolerant city. She was the Mecca of the black community of America and wanted to maintain that position. All dreams and goals, however, were put to the test when the remains of two teenage boys were found in a forest in southwestern Atlanta. They were 14-year-old Edward Hope Smith, also called Tedden, and 13-year-old Alfred Evans, also known as Q. Both disappeared in the middle of 1979, just for days apart. After the body section, it turned out that one of the victims was shot and the other was choked. At that time, the police had no idea that one of the toughest investigations in Atlanta's history was just beginning, and the predator, who took the lives of two innocent boys, had just started his bloody hunt. The investigators did not know who might be behind the crimes, and also what was the motive, and before they could find out anything, there was another problem. On September 4th, Milton Harvey, 14, disappeared without a trace. Mom asked him to go to the bank and fix some things. So he got on his bicycle and went ahead of him. His relatives never saw him alive again. The boy's bicycle was found a week later. His body was in November. But even this murder didn't alarm the police. The investigators suspected that this was just one of the many cases they had to deal with so far. At that time, the Atlanta police investigated more than 200 murders a year. Most of them concerned the African American community in poorer parts of the city. Officials thought the deaths of 3 children were unrelated, and it would only be a matter of time to catch the perpetrators. However, this has not happened. On October 21st, 9-year-old Yusuf Bale went out to the store. He was supposed to buy his neighbor tobacco. Witnesses saw him in the store, and later, as he got into the blue car. After that, the trail broke. The body of the child was found on November 8th in an abandoned primary school. The chariot stumbled upon them. The boy was wearing the same clothes he left the house in October. The difference was that a piece of masking tape was glued to them. The body section revealed that the boy was hit twice in the head and also suffocated. Yusuf's mother for years fought for justice for her son and the other murdered children. She set up a committee that was supposed to hear every case and look at the authorities' hands. Because, according to Camille Bale, they ignored all the disappearances.
The city authorities have sent us a clear signal. We don't care about the death of your children. When you called the police station to ask about the state of the investigation, the detective was never at the station. And he never called back. No one sent any warnings. Before the city announced that something bad was going on, 10 children were dead.
The list of missing children has dangerously begun to grow. On March 4th, 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier was struck. The girl disappeared after visiting a friend. Her body was found 6 days later in a forested, empty parking lot. The perpetrator pushed her into the mouth with a white lingerie that didn't belong to her. Her hands were constricted by an electrical wire. The cause of death was suffocation. Just a week after the girl's disappearance, 11-year-old Jeffrey Mattis disappeared without a trace. A few months later, the witness testified that he saw the boy as he got into a blue car. 2 men were supposed to be inside, one with a light and the other with a dark carnation. Jeffrey's body was found almost a year after his mysterious disappearance. They were abandoned on the edge of the forest. On May 18th, Eric Middlebrooks received a phone call at home. Then he quickly jumped on his bicycle and pressing the hammer he drove in front of him. The 15-year-old was found a day later. His body was on the back of one of the bars. The perpetrator hit him a few times with a sharp tool. He also suffered a serious head injury, which was a direct cause of death. It is known that Eric testified in court a few weeks earlier against 3 teenage boys. There were accusations of assault in the background. 12-year-old Christopher Richardson went to the pool on June 9th. He was seen walking towards the swimming pool. The boy hasn't returned home. His body was found only in January. Investigators have not been able to determine how the child died. Less than 2 weeks later, a witness saw 2 men kidnapping 7-year-old LaToni Wilson. The trail of the girl was on one of the parking lots. Until the 18th of October, the day the bodies were found, the child's place of residence was unknown. The remains were found in a fenced area on Verbena Street in Atlanta. Due to the advanced distribution, it was impossible to determine the cause of death. By the end of 1980, 8 more children had suffered a similar fate. 10-year-old Aaron White was also seen riding a blue car. The 9-year-old Anthony Carter and the 10-year-old Earl Terrell. 13-year-old Clifford Jones, 10 years Darren Glass, whose body has never been found. 12-year-old Charles Stevens, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson, and 16-year-old Patrick Rogers. Some of these victims were caught in the Chattahoochee River. The more children were killed, the more public pressure was exerted not only on the police but also on the Atlanta authorities. The black mayor, in whom the inhabitants placed great hopes, turned out to be a disappointing politician, who cared primarily for the image of the city. Camille Bell therefore organized a conference, but also a confrontation with the city authorities. The police were accused of not involving the local community in their group, who knew the most about themselves. The authorities have been convinced that they are doing what they can, although the investigation consumes enormous financial resources. Therefore, morning masses were organized throughout the city, at which money was collected to support the continuation of the police work. At the beginning of 1981, more crimes were committed. On the 3rd of January, 14-year-old Lou Begetta disappeared. His body was found 2 days later. In the same month, his friend, 15-year-old Terry Pooh, disappeared. 6 more bodies were found in February and March. Among them is 21-year-old Eddie Duncan, who broke the scheme because he was the first adult victim. 3 people who were not children were murdered in April. Larry Rogers, 20, Jimmy Payne, 28, and John Porter, 28. 2 and the last were prisoners and were released from the prison just before the murder. On May 12th, the body of 17-year-old William Barrett, known as Billy Starr, was found. Although the victims differed in age, there were quite a few things in common. They were all African Americans, and their disappearances and murders took place in the same area. The method of killing was not the same. Some of the victims were choked, others were shot, and others were stabbed with a knife. There were several theories. One of them said that white racists were behind the murders, and thus wanted to get rid of the black community. The families of the victims did not believe that someone from their ethnic group could be behind the crimes. The atmosphere was fueled by an explosion in a kindergarten in October 1980. 5 people were killed, 4 children and a teacher. The FBI was involved in the investigation. A special task force was set up and a police officer was introduced, but it's all for nothing. There was no suspicious evidence or motive. The inhabitants were scared of it. They watched their children all the time. They carried guns with them and they didn't talk to strangers. The educated children were in self-defense, and the public repeated, "We no longer trust the police and we do not trust their professionalism." The inhabitants were waiting for any breakthrough that would end this 2-year terror. The return came in the spring of 1981. The investigators found that the clothes of the murdered children carried one big clue. On many of them, dog hair was found, as well as unusual fiber from the green cover. When this information leaked to the media, the victims began to flow out of the river. This allowed the perpetrator or perpetrators to get rid of the evidence. That's why the police decided, you need to set up patrols near the bridges. 14 of them were identified, which the perpetrator could take advantage of. On the 22nd of May, during a patrol, one of the officers heard a whistle under the bridge in the middle of the night. Another officer noticed a white Chevrolet Combi leaving from there. After a moment, the car turned around and crossed the bridge again. The detective immediately lit a light. They followed the vehicle, and a radio truck stopped him. Wayne Williams, 23, was behind the wheel. Wayne turned out to be a thin, low black man with glasses. He presented himself as a music promoter, as well as an independent photographer. The car he was driving belonged to his parents. When the police asked him if he knew why he was arrested, he replied, "Yeah, it's about those missing kids." Channel 2 reports this very well. He convinced me that he was going to interview a young talent, some kind of Cheryl Johnson. The investigators got suspicious. It was midnight, and after checking it, it turned out that the data Williams gave was not true. One of the cops was convinced that Wayne's car also had a nylon rope and gloves. However, they were not secured. Nor were any bodies found in the place where the whistle had been heard before. The FBI had no choice. The man was released. 2 days later, the naked body of Nathaniel Cater came out of the river. It was believed that he could have been thrown right when he was stopped at Wayne Williams Bridge. So the agents started watching the 23-year-old. In one of the previously adopted psychological profiles, it was agreed that the perpetrator may be a single person who still lives with his parents. She was probably black and was constantly following media reports about the disappearances of children. Williams was a perfect fit for this profile. He lived with his parents, he wasn't in a relationship, and in the car, he had a police intercept. His vehicle had plenty of lights and a long antenna. To the illusion, it resembled a police radio car. The investigators found that he could easily pretend to be an officer and thus attract children. Williams was examined with a lie detector. He passed the test 3 times. He failed all the trials. He was asked, among other things, about the murder of Nathaniel Cater. Wayne said he had nothing to do with him, but the detector said something else. On Nathaniel's body were also found characteristic green fibers, which allowed investigators to link the murders of children with his death. Thus, Williams began to circle the belief that he could have on account not only the murder of Cater, but also the children. Wayne's car was set up in the police garage. It's been tested. At the same time, the suspect's home was also checked. As it turned out, the building hid a lot of surprises. Among other things, we found a lot of slideshows showing young boys. There was a green covering in several rooms. The family also owned a dog, the German Shepherd sheep. Everything started to fit. The fibers from the coating have been removed. In the lab, it was immediately noticed that they were perfectly matched to those found on the bodies of some of the victims. The investigators felt the euphoria growing in them. They were convinced they had the right man, but Wayne Williams didn't intend to surrender and confess to the murders. He hired a lawyer and started a fight to prove his innocence. Williams was on the loose. He went home and called a press conference. Wayne was doing a show around him. He screamed at the cops, talked to the media, and was constantly in sight. Just like a celebrity, not a suspect in a brutal crime. He posed, waved, and smiled at the photographers. You could have the impression that he finally got the 5 minutes of fame that he's been waiting for his whole life. While Williams was walking in the light of the cameras, the prosecutor's office was preparing to sue him for murder. On the 21st of June, he was arrested. The cops came for him home and drove him into a white car. As he got into the vehicle, Wayne didn't even know that he had just said goodbye to his freedom forever. Williams was charged with the murder of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Payne. The families of the murdered children were angry because there was no word in the indictment about their comfort. If the authorities assured you that Wayne was the monster who kidnapped the children, why wasn't he charged? The fibers found matched. It was also established that the 23-year-old distributed leaflets mainly in so-called black neighborhoods. In this way, he sought young talents, which he wanted to engage in his teen demeanor. The condition was the age range, from 11 to 21 years, extremely close to the one in which the killer was also rotating. What might have prevailed behind Wayne's charge of Cater's murder was the testimony of a witness named Robert Henry. He admitted that the night Nathaniel was killed, he saw a man walking by Williams' hand. The trial began on January 6, 1982. Just before it started, Wayne fired one of his lawyers. The latter, in turn, admitted years later that his client was extremely self-reliant, arrogant, and self-confident, and that he had many faces. He wanted to have complete control throughout the trial, and he did not intend to give any authority to his lawyers. Meanwhile, the prosecution has adopted a simple strategy. It was about presenting the evidence in such a way that the jury did not doubt that Williams was guilty. A major role was to be played by the found fibers, which were combined with Wayne's coding. The process was very much attracted by the media and public opinion. On the day of its opening, about 300 people appeared in the hall. There were also several mothers of the murdered children, although their names were not included in the indictment. The defense from the outset tried to challenge the prosecution's evidence. It was assured that Williams, with his weight and height, would not be able to pull a dead man out of the car and throw him through the barriers. But the indictment was of a different opinion. As he said, Wayne could do it without a problem, because the barriers were low. Just like the trunk, the defense also challenged the results of the body section. According to her, Nathaniel died at least 7 days before the body was found. This would mean that night, when the officers heard the plow, Williams couldn't throw the body into the water. It was also suspected that Jimmy Payne was killed by accidental drowning, not by murder. The prosecution involved several children in the trial to prove that Williams was acting in the scheme. It was about the method of killing, the abandonment of bodies, the selection of victims, and the fibers found on the bodies. Not only were they connected, but the Williams dog's fur was also connected. Fibers from bed, bathroom, or gloves were also suitable. In addition, Williams denied that he knew any of the victims, while witnesses were found to have seen him with at least a few victims. There were also inconsistencies in his testimony. The trial took less than 2 months. Wayne seemed to the jury extremely arrogant. He didn't make a good impression of what might have buried his chance of freedom. On the 27th of February, after less than 12 hours of trial, he was found guilty of the murder of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Payne, a life sentence. But the families of the victims missed the most important thing. Williams wasn't convicted of killing children. Therefore, not all mothers believed in his guilt. Wayne's family was convinced that an innocent man had been convicted, and the entire state apparatus was directed against Williams. Even his lawyers, after the verdict was announced, assured that they were in a lost position from the start because the FBI spent huge amounts of money on the whole trial, a total of $2 million. After the conviction of Wayne Williams, the services made another controversial decision. They have closed an investigation into the deaths of more than 20 children. It's as if they assumed that the perpetrator is already in prison. Even though he hasn't been convicted for the crimes he was accused of, the families of the victims were in shock. They felt an enormous injustice. A lot of people didn't believe Wayne was guilty, mostly because of his parents. Williams was born on May 27, 1958. His father, Homer, was a photographer working with various editorial agencies. Her mother, Faye, was a respected teacher. They didn't belong to the elite, but they were very popular. All the neighbors repeated that it was a decent family that would not raise a child-killing monster. Wayne was an extremely polite and diligent student at school. It seemed that with his intelligence, self-confidence, and self-denial, he was able to much. He graduated from high school and a strange phase of his life began. Williams dreamed of a musical career. He wanted to be a manager and a young talent hunter. He started working with radio stations. He also tried his strength as a photographer. He believed he would find his own Michael Jackson and form a band with him to conquer the music scene. However, this has not happened. You know the rest of the story. Williams never confessed to the murders for which he was convicted, as well as to taking the lives of the children who were attributed to him. To this day, he is convinced that he is innocent and has become a victim of the services, which quickly wanted to find the perpetrator and close the investigation, compromising for themselves.
I'm not talking about murder, but the truth is, I didn't kill anyone. It's people who want to make me a killer. They want, in the depths of their hearts, to put an end to this matter at all costs and forget it. And the easiest way to do that is to point me out as a killer.
In the late 1990s, Wayne filed a petition asking for his case to be reconsidered. However, the Supreme Court of Batts County rejected the appeal. In 2004, Wayne tried again. His lawyers were convinced that the law enforcement agencies had concealed the evidence of the Ku Klux Klan's involvement in the murders, and the fibers, which were among the most important evidence, according to the attorneys, would not survive scientific analysis. But this time the court did not share Williams's arguments and rejected the request for a re-examination of the case. According to Wayne, the authorities didn't want to allow a white man to be convicted. If these cops were to arrest a white person, there would be riots in the major cities. We'd have another racial war. Wayne Williams is serving his sentence in Telfair State Prison. In 2019, he requested a reduction in his sentence, but this request was also not taken into account. He will be able to apply for another conditional release in November 2027. Also in the ranks of the police, some people did not believe in the guilt of Williams. In 2005, Police Commander Louis Graham wanted to resume the case of 4 boys who were killed between February and May 1981. These murders were attributed to Wayne, but according to Graham, there was an innocent man in prison. However, the Fulton County authorities have not decided to resume the case. In August 2005, a report was released that Charles T. Sanders, associated with the Ku Klux Klan, was one of the first suspects in the murder of black children. He also recorded a conversation in which he praised the murders. One of the anonymous witnesses was also supposed to say that Sanders confessed to the murders and that his brothers would help him with everything. However, no evidence of the men's guilt was found. They've also been tested with a lie detector. The case was closed in July 2006. The children of Atlanta were made public thanks to the book Manhunter. The author, former FBI profiler Johnny Douglas, admitted that, in his view, all the evidence indicated Williams' guilt in the deaths of 11 people. However, no strong links have been found to allow him to be charged with the murder of other children. In 2007, hairs were found on one of the victims. They've been tested for DNA. They confirmed they belonged to Wayne Williams. In 2010, the technique was reused and the hair that was on the body of 11-year-old Patrick Balthaser was examined. The result was ambiguous, but again the database suggested that the hair may have belonged to Williams. In 2019, the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and the police commander announced that all the evidence collected during the trial would be re-examined. As Bottoms explained, maybe there's nothing to test anymore, but I think history will judge us on our actions, and we'll be able to say we tried. Wayne Williams is 66 today. He's charged with 20 for murders.